Okay, it's exactly 3 minutes after 11, and I think we'll start. Hello, everybody. My name is Christine Magaju. I'm a research associate with the Soil and Hand Health at World Agroforestry, based in Nairobi, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this session, and especially on World Soil Day. Happy World Soil Day, everybody. And we'll be talking about soil as a foundation. So how do we implement, how do we scale, how do we monitor land restoration with soil health at the base of it for the land degradation neutrality? So before we start, when was the last time you touched soil? Just think about it for a second. When was the last time you held soil in your hand? The day before you came to the COP, right? Did you appreciate it, how instrumental it is to your own well-being, right? Like, especially on this day, we don't need to be told how important soil is, right? Healthy soil is inextricably linked to our own well-being. So I'm hoping we can explore how we can use soil to monitor, implement as we aim towards the national, global, and international goals, and especially towards land neutrality. Land degradation neutrality. Let's see. So if I can move this. So we'll have a really great session. Wonderful. We'll hear from a keynote speaker in terms of the challenges when it comes to engaging with smallholder farmers. We'll also have a wonderful panel made up of scientists, practitioners on some of the things you're doing, implementing and monitoring restoration on the ground. And hopefully we'll have an interactive session as well with you in terms of what you're doing in your own space around this topic. This is not it. Okay, great. So before we start, these are some of the objectives of this session. So we'll be showcasing advancements in soil health. We'll also be exploring some of the approaches we're using to restore activities, but also emphasizing on the role of citizen science, the role of involving communities, the role of involving farmers, and engaging them in the process. We're hoping to inspire collaborations towards land restoration goals, as well as encourage partnerships and collaboration in ensuring successful restoration initiatives. And I'm hoping it's not there that we can make a case, call for action when it comes to integrating soil health in global, national, and local initiatives. So at this point, it is my pleasure to welcome John Mundi, the Director of Global Partnerships, Climate Finance and Technology at the One Acre Fund, to give us the keynote. Let's encourage him.
Thank you. I need the encouragement because I couldn't find a coffee without a lime this morning. So I know it's really bad. And just to add, I'm Action on Food Hub as well as One Acre Fund today. So those of you who don't know, the Action on Food Hub is a combination of 3 pavilions and organizers from EIT Food, ProVeg International, and the Future Economy Forum, who collected the different pavilions from COP28 in Dubai and organized at COP29, an incredibly effective pavilion with many partners, including ourselves and Cash and ICRAF, etc., to really spotlight the need for more investment in smallholder farmers and food systems, and to align objectives of the civil society who work on food systems with negotiators at COP29. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and give a really brief overview of the outcomes of that network of partners from COP29, and then somehow get to the reality on the ground of soil health monitoring, foundation of soil health across the Rio Conventions, and smallholder needs when it comes to monitoring and technology. So if I manage to do that in the next 8.5 minutes, then great. If I don't make any sense, hopefully the panel can clear that up. Thanks a lot. Okay, great. So one of the things that the Action on Food Hub this year that was really important is we actually had 3 spaces. We had 93 partners, and we had a policy space as well as a youth engagement space, as well as a space like this where we had nice panel conversations. The Coalition for Action on Soil Health was incredibly present throughout the event. And what we found was we've effectively rolled out various initiatives on methane initiatives. We launched the nitrous oxide hub. Interestingly, nitrous oxide, obviously very important when it comes to soils and soil health, but also emissions in the world. There is no global alliance or policy initiative around nitrous oxide. So there is now on the methane hub, which has been incredibly successful, and actually the Action on Food hub was instrumental in organizing that. But there's now a nitrous oxide hub. So that's a really exciting development. There were various panels on soil health, healthy diets, plant-based foods, and nature-friendly and regenerative agriculture. I won't go into details there, but the big news from COP29, obviously, is that it was the climate finance COP. So a lot of the conversations at the Action on Food Hub, driven by One Acre Fund and many other partners, was the stark gap between the climate finance available and the climate finance needs for smallholder farmers. We estimate as One Acre Fund that there is a $151 billion gap in climate finance for smallholder farmers. They currently receive only about 0.3% of global climate finance. So obviously at COP29 being the climate finance COP, we would have expected a lot more action on this. However, we really didn't see that. Another alliance of 50 million smallholder farmers estimate that only 14% of global agricultural finance goes to small-scale farmers. They were advocating more in the negotiating rooms than we were. And as you might have read, the very catchy sounding NCQG, New Collective Goal for Quantified, New Collective Quantified Goals, which is replacing the much better named Loss and Damage Fund, essentially, is a $300 billion commitment to everything for the world to adapt, right? And I think as the Action on Food group, we would say, we have no idea what that means yet, right? We have no idea where that money is going to go. So when you think about soil health, and you think about the opportunity to finance soil health, which requires significantly more investment than we have today, we have no idea what that money means right now. So I'm just going to put that out there. We don't have any answers, but there is a lot of movement. There's the UAE Declaration on Food Systems. There's the Sharm el-Sheikh joint work in agriculture and food security. There's the Global Alliance for Champions. There's the Harmonia Initiative. Most of them are focusing on online portals. I don't quite understand why online portals are important. I've tried to ask people to explain it to me, including many members of the Action on Food Hub. And it's possibly where I disagree a little bit with the community, is that we don't see any practical brass tacks ideas, case studies for how do we advance all of our collective climate goals, but most importantly, soil health with smallholder farmers. So that's a lot of the good news, the bad news, and the ugly. I think, so COP29 has made progress. It's a stepping stone to COP30. What can this community do? What can we do as cash? What can we do as Action on Food? Well, I think we need to present much more practical ideas on the global stage and highlight why this is important for the world. I can't tell you how many people ask me, okay, you want $151 billion for 511 smallholder farmers. It's $300 per farmer per year. Why would we invest that? Now, I would say $300 is less than you paid for your flight to get to COP, whether this one or the last one. But they would say, investors would say, and many donors are saying, they're tired. They're tired of hearing these calls to action. So what does it actually mean, that $300 invested in a smallholder farmer every year for climate resilience? Well, we know as part of this group that agroforestry systems, soil health initiatives, increasing biomass in whole nation states is incredibly important for geopolitical security, migration, a whole host of issues that people aren't really quantifying right now. So at least my call to action here today and for the world is, if we're talking about soil health and soil health monitoring, let us remember that the world needs to understand why this is important and put into the context that they understand if we're going to finance it. And if we don't finance it, it's very hard to put into practice. Now, I quickly want to make a couple of remarks about the 3 Rio Conventions in soil health as a foundation, the top tagline of our event. And then I quickly want to talk about One Acre Fund's views on soil health monitoring at scale, because I think that's really important for the panel that's coming up. So just, the Biodiversity Convention, COP16, before COP29, the other COP16, And then COP29 is the climate COP, climate finance, climate COP, adaptation, mitigation. And here is the desertification COP, which is really a land degradation COP. I don't think it's just deserts, right? So how does soil as a foundation link those three? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that soils, for many of the scientists in the room, I don't need to explain, are the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world. So why would they not be central to COP16 in Colombia and the Biodiversity Convention? It is very clear that soil health is central to biodiversity in the world. However, what you may also not realize when it comes to smallholder farmers is smallholder farmers are genuinely threatening biodiversity around the world. And this is a hard thing to say as an organization who serves one acre farmers, but they are driving deforestation. They are driving ecosystem loss. Why are they driving that loss, though? That's the key question. And the key reasons behind their drivers of ecosystem loss and biodiversity degradation is because they are hunting for healthy soil, right? At the end of the day, smallholder farmers are hunting for healthy soil. And we cannot solve the biodiversity challenge without increasing soil health. It's obvious to me. I don't know why it isn't obvious to the world. We estimate as One Acre Fund that if we don't double maize yields by 2050 in Africa, we will lose 28 million hectares of forest, primary forest. That's about the size of Uganda. Okay, so that's how biodiversity and soil health link. Climate change and soil health, I think it's even more obvious, but let me quickly break it down to you. Adaptation and mitigation are both key pillars of UNFCCC negotiations. Soil is obviously a carbon sink if you do the right things. It's also a carbon emitter if you do the wrong things. A third of the world's emissions are coming from agriculture today, but 3 billion people on the planet don't have access to healthy diets, in part because of climate change and our food system vulnerabilities. In the case of adaptation, you have 511 million smallholder farmers who are the most vulnerable people on the planet to climate change. So obviously, helping them adapt is incredibly important for the climate agenda. And then when it comes to climate finance, if you don't invest in smallholder farmers and invest in their soil health, you can never adapt and mitigate climate change, essentially. So we all know that. And then UN, this is the easiest, I think, UNCCC desertification COP. Just a quick anecdote, and one of the segues to our conversation today. We're just opening up a pilot in DRC with the Central African Forest Initiative in the west of Congo, west of Kinshasa. And it's 98% of deforestation in DRC is driven by slash and burn agriculture. Again, smallholder farmers hunting these soils. So that's a key issue, obviously. Charcoal, firewood, etc. What happens to those forests when you cut them down? And as you all know, tropical rainforests are actually terrible for agriculture, right? So after a few seasons, those forests become savanna, they become arid, they become desert over time. So that's pretty clear how UN CCD and desertification links. What we've also found with those farmers, though, is that they don't know anything about their soils, and they've been recycling the same cassava seeds since 1992, right? So they're getting incredibly low yields from their cassava. They have no access to agroforestry species or any kind of faster growing trees for their fuelwood needs. So at the moment, we're expecting smallholder farmers to mitigate climate change, stop desertification, prevent biodiversity loss, sequester carbon, become regenerative agriculture farmers without any money. So I think it's clear to me that when you look at the foundational needs of soil health in the world, don't currently understand what's happening in their soils. Many smallholder farmers don't understand what's happening in their soils. And so monitoring these drivers of all of these issues, climate, biodiversity, and desertification, with smallholder farmers at scale is critical. And then connecting that monitoring to real practical action on the ground. Farmers will want to know, okay, so my soil is deficient in potassium. What does that mean for me? Where do I buy corrective measures? Where do I buy nutrients? How much nutrients do I need? How do I access finance? How do I do that tomorrow? So we need to link soil health and monitoring and landscape monitoring for soil health at scale. We see one ecofund many ways of doing that, and I think the panel is about to explore many of the practical solutions involved.
Great. That was very inspiring and a very great way to start us off. So hearing about how soil linked across the three conventions, what is happening, what farmers need, and it sets up us very nicely for the next panel, because in the next half an hour we'll be exploring how do we implement monitoring, what do we monitor on the ground. So please join me in welcoming my panel, or our panel. Okay. We'll keep Johnny's we'll keep his photo there. All right. No, don't reflect on the inspiring words that he just said. All right. To start us off, I'd like to welcome Dr. Lee Winwiki to the stage. So Winwiki leads the soil and land health theme at the World Agroforestry and co-leads the Coalition for Action on Soil Health. Please. Then I'd like to invite Dr. Samuel Gameda, Senior Soil Scientist at CIMMYT. Please to join us on stage. Jonathan Gishuru, Environmental Specialist. WIPAD, hopefully you'll tell us what WIPAD stands for. And Coalition for Action on Soil Health, Youth for Soil. Great, that's very great. And Schutz, really? Okay. Global advocacy lead for Create, please. And finally, Veronica Vasilica from the G20 Global Land Initiative. Great. So I hope we've reflected a little bit. I mean, we've had a few seconds, but I hope we've reflected a little bit about what John said. And to start us off, Lee, you lead the soil and land health theme, and how does your work with the LDSF, so the Land Degradation Surveillance Framework? Hopefully you can tell us a little bit about what that is. Advance an understanding of soil and ecosystem health at landscape scale. So we had from at farmer scale. So how do you also go from monitoring at farmer scale all the way to the landscape scale? Great, thanks. Oh, I'm hogging all the mics.
Great, thanks, Christine, and thanks everyone, and thank you, John. Honestly, I hope this is recorded because your opening was absolutely brilliant, and I think your point about trying to understand why farmers are doing what they're doing is really important. And I love the quote of hunting for soil, healthy soil. So that's exactly what we're trying to do at C4ECROF, is to really develop an understanding of the soil, biologically, chemically, physically. And in the old days, pre-SANS generation, they used to just go in the field and take soil samples and then leave. But that's not what we do in the Land Degradation Surveillance Framework. We go in the field, we collect the soil samples, we talk with the farmers and the pastoralists. What is the management practices? Do you burn? Do you apply farmyard manure? We look at erosion, and then we also look at vegetation diversity. And I think that this is really important because we must understand the relationship between management and soil health, between vegetation diversity and soil health. So we've been doing this across 45 countries in the tropics, and we now have the largest database of soil, carbon, soil health, land degradation, and vegetation diversity. But to John's point, data isn't enough. It's not enough to just have this database. How are we using these data to engage with the pastoralists, to engage with the communities, and to improve practices on the ground? So I say improve practices on the ground. It's not just about recommendations. It's about actually having that conversation with farmers. And I hope that we can start bringing more practical solutions to these COPs, and forget about the online portal if you don't have, if no one has access to it, because farmers really do want to improve their soil health and their economy and the education and everything else. So I think we need to adapt how we share this information, and digital tools is certainly one of them, but also face to face. So we actually use citizen science, but we call it assisted citizen science, because there has to be that engagement with farmers so that we can really co-develop solutions.
Great, and I'll follow up in a little bit. But to move on, Dr. Gameda, can you tell us a little bit about your work, but also especially how the Vision for Adapted Crops and Soils, VACS, supports productivity and resilience in smallholder farming systems, but also just moving from farm scale, how can we scale that up then to either landscape and other scales?
Okay, thank you. I also want to comment about John's presentation. You know, yeah. You know, in a lot of ways, one can say we're always missing the elephant in the room. Sorry. The real decision making is not the science that we do. You know, when they were making those decisions at COP29, what we really need to link our work to is things like, how is soil health related to migration or other issues that are really impactful? Because that's the real cycle. You know, if people are doing well on their farms, their children are not going to be going off to new locations. And so I think we have to look at it at a bigger picture like that. And I also am a generalist, like you said earlier, outside, besides my soil science hat. And those are the questions I don't have answers to, but I think those are the real questions. And you know, within the context of agricultural practices and whatnot, we've focused a lot of times on really high yielding crops and things like that. But what the Vision for Adapted Crops is saying is we've neglected a whole set of crops that farmers have used over generations, that are rich in nutrients, that are climate adapted, you know, for the locations that they have. And it's time to come back to those, because there's a lot of times when we're full in terms of calorie, but we're still, you know, hungry in terms of micronutrients. And those are the types of things that these adapted crops, basically they're orphan crops that have been neglected by science, by breeding, and by research in this. And so it's bringing back those and seeing how can we actually get them into, on the one hand, in the scientific realm, include the breeding technologies that we have to propagate them, to get them out. But related to that also, because these also have an impact on the soil, how we address soil health within that context. Some of these crops are perennial crops, so you have better soil cover, you have deeper root systems, so you have greater soil organic buildup, but also protection against erosion and the like. So the vision behind VACS is to bring that back and to see to what extent we can address both food and nutrition insecurity. And in terms of scaling, basically, a lot of these are context specific. So the approach is to see to what extent, is to devise strategies at both, well, a whole range of scales, from the global down to the field. And, you know, in promoting that, to be able to, you know, have strategies at all levels and all scales.
Great. And just a quick follow-up, just out of interest. So you talked about, you know, food, crops and soil, but is the nutrient that how healthy the soil is affecting the nutrient in the crops? Just
Yes, definitely. I think one of the areas of work that we've done is what we call geonutrition, which is the link between how you manage the soil, how you address the nutrients in the soil. A lot of times our fertilizers only have things like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. They neglect micronutrients. And we've shown that when you have poor soils with poor micronutrient content, you also have micronutrient deficient populations living on that, especially in production systems where most farmers consume their own, and their families and households consume their own. So it's very important to address the nutrient content of the soil, but to do it in such a way that it's also able to hold those nutrients through, better soil health, soil conditions.
Great. And Jonathan, you are in one of the largest young professionals, network of young professionals working in agriculture. Could you tell us from your experience, what are the most effective ways to engage with and empower youth, especially around soil health?
Thank you so much. I think I'm the youngest in this panel, so I'm excited. So I'm a member of YPAD, which stands for Young Professionals for Agricultural Development. I'm part of the Kenyan chapter, and also a member of the Youth for Soil, which is an initiative by the Coalition of Action for Soil Health, co-led by Dr. Lee. Glad to be on a panel with you. So to start off, I just want to say that sustainable practices, including soil management, is key to restoration and contributes positively to land degradation, neutrality, and food security. And as John mentioned, agriculture and food systems is very relevant to the three COPs, and they are uniquely placed to contribute to deliver on both mitigation and adaptation. And for instance, a new FAO analysis that was done recently highlights that 94% of the current NDCs highlight that agriculture and food systems are relevant for adaptation and 91% for mitigation. This positions them as key climate solutions with co-benefits that align to SDG 1, SDG 2, and SDG 15. And this is extremely important because only 17% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track, according to the UN SDGs 2024 report. And so having said this, we know that youth are key actors in this process across the value chain, not just in terms of production, but all the way to the end up to marketing processes. And young people should be included because of the following reasons. The first one is population dynamics. We are youth aged between 15 to 24 years make up 1.2 billion globally. And in my country, Kenya, 75% of the population under 35 is youth. So, and then another reason is because we are in an era of digital transformation, and young people are digital natives, and we are innovative as well. Another reason is because we want to approach it from a human rights-based approach. We are some of the most vulnerable people in the world, and we deserve to be included and meaningfully participate in processes. And then because it's also the moral thing to do, and it makes economic sense to involve some of the majority of the population. So a recent Youth for Soil brief highlights that there are several avenues that young people can meaningfully engage in scaling soil health initiatives. The first one is awareness raising, innovation and technology, policy advocacy, and then we have community engagement, education, and then science and research. So all these are some of the avenues that youth can contribute actively. And also I want to clearly point out that there's a huge gap, an existing gap, and Dr. Lee can agree with me. You've just mentioned that soil data and there's a challenge to translate science, policy, soil data, complex information, to translate it to be for farmers to be able to absorb this information. and I've seen it on the ground myself. And I think this is where young people can play a key role to kind of bridge this gap, and not just from scientists to farmers, from farmers to scientists as well. We can be able to bring the knowledge that farmers have because they want to be listened to. They already know what they want on the ground, and that's what they want to deliver to scientists. But I feel like that gap can be bridged well with the youth because we stand between most of our parents are also farmers as well. So thank you.
Great. You did ask for practical ideas and for boots on the ground, right? And since you're not running away from the digital, so maybe it's a different scales with different groups in terms of who uses what tools. All right. Annie, so again, John in his opening remarks talked about the need for practical ideas and bringing them to this scale. Could you tell us and give us some examples of how tree aid initiatives have improved livelihoods while at the same time restoring ecosystems?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So hi, everybody. I work for Tree Aid. We are an international NGO that has been working with African dryland communities for over 35 years now. So we work with people who usually live on $1 a day or less and are at the absolute front line of climate crises and desertification crises. So our mission is really to support and work alongside those communities to lift themselves out of poverty through ecosystem restoration. And so we do this through 4 pillars of action, which is quite a holistic vision. The first one, of course, is support these communities with tools to restore and sustainably manage their life using agroforestry techniques. So encouraging trees to come back into the landscapes to increase the fertility of the soil that they so importantly rely on for survival and livelihoods. The 2 other ones I'd like to refer back to John's opening remarks. It seems to be a red line among panelists now. So hunting for healthy soils, absolutely. And I'd like to even ask the questions, why? So in many parts of the world, such as the African drylands, that's because those communities suffer from very severe poverty, but they also don't have secure access and control of these lands. So that's where we focus our second and third pillar of our approach. We work very closely with communities and local governments to ensure that local communities, the most vulnerable communities, have access and control over the land that they will then be able to restore securely. And third, we really work with them to develop livelihoods, so a very strong incentive to keep restoring the land and the forest. We work for example, a lot of non-timber forest product value chains. So in Burkina Faso, I've got some of my colleagues in the room here. That means working with moringa, shea nuts, baobab, honey as well, to create livelihoods and additional income so that local communities become custodians of the land with a massive incentive to keep protecting that ecosystem. And then the last sort of action that we incorporate in our approach is a food security chapter. So making sure that those tree food products are reintroduced back into the diets of local communities to increase food security. You asked for example, I'm getting to it. So recently, I think a really good example is a project we implemented in 4 regions in Burkina Faso with Swiss government funding. And so we applied that holistic approach, focusing on the value chains that I mentioned. And the results are absolutely compelling. You know, in 3 years, we've seen livelihoods and average household income increase by over 160%. You know, for these communities, that's absolutely transformational. And it goes beyond livelihoods, I'd say. So especially for young children, those food tree products have reduced malnutrition massively. We've seen a reduction of over 40% of malnutrition for children under 5 years old. So I could go on, I've got other stats, but I don't want to flood you with numbers that you'll forget. So yeah, I might stop there. There's lots of concrete examples.
Great, wonderful. And Veronica, I believe you're a young person as well. We're all young people in the room. My question to you is, what is the role of research when it comes to implementing policy and practice? But also, what do you see as what young scientists can do to influence, how we do science, but also the way forward?
Yes, thank you, Christian. Thank you for the great question. As a young scientist myself, I have reflected on this throughout my academic years. So I would like to take you through my personal journey in answering this question. It's story time. So during my bachelor studies in Italy, I focused on remote sensing and geographic information systems. And of course, while GIS is a very powerful tool and it has many practical applications, the way it was framed at the time for me, it felt quite disconnected from practical implementation. And I found myself wondering, how could I bridge the gap between science and action? And I thought maybe scientist's place is in a lab. Maybe research is in a lab, collecting samples, conducting analysis, and producing results that could drive change. So I pursued my master's in global change ecology in Germany, and I specialized on soil research. I collected my samples, analyzed the data, wrote a paper, and as I reflected on the outcome, I realized that the impact of my work might be limited to the narrow academic circles, so reaching a very narrow audience. So once again, I questioned whether my research was truly making a difference. Before I continue, I'd like to say that I love research, and I firmly believe it is key in supporting land restoration. However, I see a serious lack of focus on applied research, applied scientific research, restoration, which by its very nature is applied science, is not mainstream in labs, especially not in Europe, where I have finished my studies. So this brings me to my first point, which is implementation. I believe more scientific research should focus on supporting projects on the ground, and this, yes, would have an impact. During my fellowship sorry. So during my fellowship with World Agroforestry in Kenya, I worked on a project assessing soil health on farms where regenerative agricultural practices were implemented. And what stood out to me the most wasn't just the data itself. It was my conversations with the farmers. They shared how the project had improved their lives, providing them with better tools and renewed hope for their land. It was a truly inspiring moment for me that showed me how research can validate and promote initiatives like this, scaling their impact and supporting more on-the-ground projects. Of course, there are other ways in which research can be impactful. A second path that it can take in influencing the way forward is the science policy interface. This is such an exciting area. It's a bit of a hidden gem for young scientists, and it's where you take all the data, the analysis, the findings, and shape them into something that policymakers can actually use. It's about connecting the dots between what's happening in the field and the decisions being taken in the conference rooms. But here's the key. It isn't just about crunching numbers. It's about framing the findings in a way that are relevant to decision makers, whether that's a policymaker is shaping international frameworks or establishing national land degradation neutrality targets. That's the power of research when it's translated into policy. So another way research can make an impact is through capacity building and scientific divulgation. This is about engaging the broader public and making restoration mainstream. At the G20 Global Land Initiative, I worked on coordinating the development of university courses that are free university courses, aimed at training future land restoration experts. And this experience showed me how empowering education can create ripple effects and equipping more people with the skills and knowledge to tackle land degradation challenges. So now about young scientists. One of the most important lessons I've learned is that we need to expand our work beyond the confines of the lab. It's not enough to stay in our comfort zones, focusing on data collection and analysis. To truly make a difference, young scientists need to step into interdisciplinary spaces, connect with policymakers and practitioners, and translate their findings into action. So this means stepping into uncomfortable spaces, learning how to communicate better, how to collaborate with people outside of academia, and how to frame our work for real world impact. So it's challenging, but it's where I think we can truly make a difference.
Great. And before I open it up for a Q&A, just to piggyback on what Veronica was talking about policy and the science interface, Lee, could you give us some examples? You talked about the vegetation data, soil data, all these cool data sets that are collected using the land degradation surveillance framework. How has that influenced policy and investment strategies? Just some few examples.
Yeah, I'll make it quick because I want to see if there's questions from the audience. But I think one of the things we're doing, thanks to the statistics from FAO on the NDCs, we also did an analysis that less than 33 NDCs mentioned soil. And as John said, it's the third largest carbon sink. So if we're talking about Kenya, which is 80% rangelands, we're only going to reach the NDCs if we actually store carbon in the soil. So what we've been doing is working with we're starting with 8, and the demand is growing, African governments, supporting them to provide the maps of soil carbon so that they can have confidence that they can track changes over time, and they can include it in the updated NDCs.
Great. Let's give our panelists a round of applause as we post it. And I'd like to open it up for questions from a very intimate audience. Sure. You can also ask.
I'm allowed to ask. That's so fine. That's so kind of you, Christine. I guess I'm a bit of a geek. I'd like to learn more about some of your thoughts about low-cost soil monitoring and technologies, and like what are the high potential ways of monitoring soil health in the world, and like what are you seeing on the ground, and what are your current research priorities? We're keen to pilot test really low-cost soil tests with smallholder farmers. We're also seeing though participatory research processes actually as effective. So asking a farmer what's happening on their land, combining with some low-cost remote sensing techniques may get us 80% of the way there. So I'd just be interested in hearing your thoughts of like core soil samples versus remote sensing versus participatory approaches and everything in between.
Anyone can, go for it, Dr. Gameda.
So, Sam, please.
Sam. Okay, go for it, Sam.
Yeah. Actually, this is a question that Lee should have handled, but she just handed over this thing. But because the lab that she leads has been very on the cutting edge of using things like spectroscopy to be able. Is this thing working? Okay. Spectroscopy to assess soil properties. And what we want to do going forward is taking that so it can be portable and can go and monitor across. The other thing is with these point data georeference to be able to make spatial assessments on that as well. So there's a lot of methodology that's going into that. And yes, we are specifically with things like carbon and things like to be able to do a really quick assessment. And I think it's there experimentally, but it's still costly. So getting that for the price to drop to be able to monitor across it would be very important, but also linking that to a global database or a regional database so that you can do spatial assessments, but also, changes over time as well, because that's what's going to give you the picture of, what is the status of your soil health, your carbon. Another area to look at is things like nitrogen and what have you. So.
Great. Do you want to add, Lee? Okay. Wonderful. Any other question? Yes, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Alexis Sampoudou from 2AIDS. Just two quick questions. Firstly, to Veronica, just to know, as a young teacher, how you manage to do accessible research findings to the farmers. The second question is for Jonathan. I don't know, as a young youth in your organization, your association, what type of advocacy you can do to mobilize funds for the youth regarding action or implementation in the ground for soil health? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. So I believe we need we need to develop the interface, the science society interface, and that can be done through different projects. As the example that I brought from Kenya, that's my personal experience of a project that was that took scientific research and brought it to the farmers and trained them. So it was scientific research was explained in a non-academic way, that everyone can understand, and it was translated into practical action, practical regenerative agricultural techniques that these farmers could actually use. And it was very inspiring to see and talk to them and see the results of this. So this is just one example, but I think that's what we need to do. I think we need more translators from academic language to everyday language. Thank you.
Great. More translators. All right. Jonathan.
Well, thank you for that question. I think the challenge that young people face mostly is because there's a lack of data and lack of evidence base that we present to financiers. And so the most important thing is to encourage young people to develop an evidence base of existing youth engagements on the ground, what they're doing to really like fully cover what they're doing in terms of also impact as well. So that even in the interactions with community engagement, this is very critical for decision making, policy processes, and as well as for financials to have something to work with in order to be able to provide the right funding. So it's kind of a long-term thing, but it's necessary to start.
Great. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I'm currently a master's student at Yale School of the Environment and also studying methane and nitrous oxide emissions. So I really appreciate that you mentioned the importance of that, because carbon isn't everything, though it is important. And I also work for the CG with the Environmental Health and Biodiversity platform. But I was interested, there's a lot of talk about like we need to do a lot more on the grounds, more actual engaged application research, but I guess I'm curious from the more experienced researchers, like how do you think young scientists like me should be doing mechanistic versus like application based research? And like, is it important to first do more mechanistic to learn more about how everything works, or is it okay to just dive straight in to application based and influencing policies as well? Just like looking back in your career, what things do you wish you had done more of, or what things are you grateful you did?
Okay, so when you're done with your master's, please reach out to me at eGraph. Absolutely. Actually, so not to be academic, but in 2008, we published a paper about interdisciplinary research. And our stance was very different than most. I believe that you have to have deep domain knowledge that you can then share and communicate with others. And I know you guys are joking that you said you're generalists. Neither of you are generalists. You have deep domain knowledge, but you're able to communicate it to people outside your domain. So think about it. If you have no knowledge, what are you going to communicate with the farmers, right? So I'm a big belief that you have some deep domain knowledge, but then you figure out how you can use that to contribute to a better world. I mean, really. And so I think it's about making sure that once you have, your master's, and then you go on and you're doing applied research. And the reason why the CG is so great, this is what I tell my CEO all the time, like literally, I choose to work in the CG because we do applied research. Everything we do is on the ground and applicable. All the LDSF surveys, we're with farmers, with youth, with pastoralists, and it's like the best place to work because you can make sure your work will have impact.
Okay, just to add to that, I would say first and foremost, it also depends on you. Like if you're really interested in delving deep into something and discovering, that's your forte. So go with that, but with the realization that it contributes to something. One of the things, yeah, I'm also in the CG because yes, I focus on applied, but I see even within the CG that most people are interested in the publications they write. And I just feel like, well, if that doesn't have an impact on the ground, it's really just for their own career. But what they provide is important to those who also take that and apply it. So what you're, interested in is very important in how you go forward in that. But it's in the context of, a broader thing. And while I have the mic, I want to say a couple of things. Back to John, of course. I think he should patent hunting for healthy soil. Yeah, but a couple of things from the presentations, particularly yours, Annie. I was just thinking, are the rangeland farmers really the canaries in the coal mine currently in climate? And, we should think of those types of things. And the other thing is, we hear about, this particular, moth or particular things has died out, it's no longer, and that doesn't have an impact because it's really, I think, we're selfish enough to think that what has impact on human beings is what's going to have an impact on that. And how is it that we frame our message from that? And you said your background is in finance. How do we get the attention of Wall Street and, London Stock Exchange? Because if they're not concerned, all the bargaining that we do at all the COPs are not going to get us anywhere. So I think we have to really think like much broad.
Yeah, Annie. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that link. I don't want to derail your Q&A. You might want to bring those points back later. But about your point to reach out to private sector investor, actually, that's an excellent point. And I think about impact most of the time. That's my focus. And interestingly enough, so tomorrow we're launching a paper about the potential of the voluntary carbon market for Sahelian communities. And by that, I mean, so farmer communities, but really vulnerable, the poorest people in the Sahel, and how they actually have the gold mine, and if we really manage to get the finance in the right hands, which is so difficult, there's a potential scalability that's incredible. But to your point, actually, when trying to launch that paper and get private investor in the room, it's a struggle. It's about how do we bridge that gap in engagement with the private sector, with private sector investors, and make the case for those public-private partnerships. where really we could scale up things seriously. There's been so much publicly funded work that's laid the groundwork in those areas ready to scale. But I think there's still some, some private investors are sitting at the table. There's people there, but there's a massive outreach. And there again, it's about translation, it's how do you speak the language of the people that will feel drawn into the room to really engage in those conversations. Thank you.
Great. And before we just wrap it up, I'd like to give Jonathan and Veronica 30 seconds to just key takeaways, final thoughts.
So I would like to keep talking about this topic that is very interesting and very important as my final thoughts. And I think we need to make restoration appealing. We need to make restoration sexy for investors. And we need to develop a business case. We need to develop business plans for restoration. One project that we have at the G20 Global Land Initiative that will come up next year is developing this MOOC on the business of land restoration, focusing on different areas, different ecosystems, on the science part of land restoration and the business side of it as well. We think that's how, first of all, through a MOOC, you reach a very broad audience. And secondly, by bringing the business in, you amplify your audience, because people that are not directly related to land restoration and science, they would be interested.
Great. That's a good way. So join the course when it's open. Jonathan, final thoughts.
Yeah, so I'd like to pose a challenge to other professional networks, youth professional networks, to initiate a youth-led review process of existing agricultural related policies and strategies in their countries, and to analyze some of the entry points that could be applicable for youths and farmer communities. Also look at how youth inclusion and meaningful participation can be included in these policies, because as they are, youth processes were not considered in the past. And then also to encourage young people to document their work, as I mentioned earlier, and also invite everyone to interact with the youth person brief that highlights all the work that young people are doing in terms of policy advocacy, awareness raising, community engagement, and all that.
Right, and that's a great challenge to see Alperen in the room, who also leads a youth network, and we had someone from the African Youth Pastoralist Initiative, so I'm sure they'll take that forward. All right, so at this point, okay, let's give up a panelist a round of applause then as they get off the stage. Oh, how'd I get it? All right, I'd like to invite, I hope I'll get it right, Alan Peterson, chairman of the Teveuni Pacific Farmers Organization, to sort of wrap up the conversation and give us some of your takeaways from the discussion. Please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. My name is Alan Peterson. I represent a farmers organization from the island of Teveuni, which is in Fiji. We're a very small island in the Pacific. Sitting here listening to all of you, it just brought back memories. Our organization started off exactly like what Jonathan was saying, from hunting for new farmlands. We plant a crop on Teveuni called taro. 30 years ago, 1990s, Fiji took over the taro export market in the Pacific. Teveuni, our island, contributed to 75% of that. So our farmers, us farmers, went from subsistence farming straight into semi-commercial farming, even commercial farming. We cut down forests looking for new soil to plant this crop. farmers are at the forefront of destroying without really understanding. And I think, what we learned as farmers, it took us 10 years to realize that our crops were getting smaller. We were producing less crops. Why? We didn't know. What we understood was our crops were getting smaller. And talking with scientists, we learned that we had destroyed the soil health. So we decided to learn more. As farmers, we started to learn. We started an organization. We started reversing this process. But the hard part over these last 30 years is getting farmers to change their mindset. And I think a solution is actually for farmers to understand what they're doing or what wrong they're doing. They want to do right. But then we have all these ideas coming in. Bottom line is farmers need to feed their families. That's where the finance part comes in. We don't need much. But people tell us, okay, you've got to stop your farming methods, change your farming methods. We got to feed our families. But maybe we can start, leave half our farms and do both. But we need some support. Policies have got to be made. Our country has a high rate of NCDs, and it's because people are eating bad foods. We plant good foods for export, and then farmers buy rubbish and feed their families. This is the truth. And how can we get over this? There's all this research going on. One of the times, farmers don't understand what the researchers are doing because the researchers are in their own little world. Farmers are in their own little world. There's no respect for each other. I think we've got to break down those silos. Even farmers amongst themselves. Farmers have a lot of knowledge. They keep that knowledge to themselves. We are encouraging farmers to share the knowledge. Also researchers to, understand that farmers have knowledge. And part of that research, sometimes the researchers do research and it's filed away in some university. Farmers aren't aware that this is being done. If this knowledge is shared, I think we need to appreciate each other more. Farmers, unfortunately, sometimes have a very low regard of researchers because it doesn't matter to their life. Well, this is the truth, Yeah, and researchers think that farmers are done. It's these attitudes that have to change, and finances as well. That's a totally different world. Farmers just don't have access to finance. How? But it's just bridging all these gaps. If we can find common ground, I'm sure we'll get somewhere. We are all living on this one planet. And soil health is the most important part of this planet. We call it Mother Earth. Are we treating Earth like a mother, our mothers? Or are we just taking? This is something that we've got to think of. What we are doing, or how are we treating soil? It won't take much, it doesn't take much money. It's actually just changing attitudes and mindsets. Thank you.
And with those inspiring and very truthful, honest closing remarks, I'll call this session to a close. Thank you very much. And go photo. And we also do have another session at 5:30 around still exploring soil health, especially for food security.